Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with jazz guitarist Randy Napoleon and music composer Gregg Hill on the 2022 CD Puppets, the music of Gregg Hill. On this new album, Randy finds energy in Gregg's quirky, out-of-the-box melodies and arranging to keep the spirit of the tune while amplifying his original intentions. Randy joins longtime compatriots in jazz like Rick Rowe, Rodney Whitaker, and Quincy Davis, along with featured New York vocalist Aubrey Johnson. It's a great release, great story. Dig this interview.
Okay, how's everyone doing?
Hey, good. You know, I was just thinking for a second, Randy, we could pull off one of the most interesting interviews ever if all of your answers were on a guitar. It would be confusing, but I think we could charter a whole new way of communicating if we did that.
That's how I talk, really. Let's be honest.
I like it. Well, hey, gentlemen, thank you for taking a minute out. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to talking about this album. And again, it's just another wonderful, wonderful album. And every time, Randy, I hear your music and, you know, based on Gregg Hill's music, it's just a wonderful meeting. It's great.
Oh, thank you so much.
The one thing I did want to start off with, which has kind of been the predominant thing that we've been talking about, unfortunately, or it's just because of the way things are, is COVID. And we were mentioning the New Orleans Jazz Fest and the world waking up. So let's kind of talk about that under that context. With the new album coming out, the world's getting into a better place. It looks like we're on the tail end of this pandemic. How does it feel to have new music and the prospects of doing all of this live now?
Oh, it's so great. You know, I imagine we probably both feel that way. Being able to be with people, you know, it's kind of like It's a Wonderful Life, that old movie. Like, you really don't take anything for granted. And when we were preparing this, it was kind of towards the tail end of kind of, you know, COVID lockdowns. We were starting to emerge, but I think we recorded this kind of soon after being vaccinated, and it was some of my first live gigs, kind of preparing to the record. But as we were leading up to it, I had an unusual amount of time without performance to prepare. So Gregg sent over these really quirky and interesting melodies, and he said, you know, Randy, go to town, do whatever you want. And so I had an awful lot of time to think about, experiment, you know, to collaborate with Aubrey Johnson in particular. And we just hopped on Zoom a lot because she lives in Brooklyn, and you know, talked about keys. And I'd ask her, like, could you sing this if I wrote a counterline here for the voice? And she said, oh yeah. The answer was always yes. So we had a great time. But yeah, it led into a really special thing with a lot of thought.
Yes, I would like to add to that. Randy's not known for lyrics, but his lyrics on this album are just tremendous. He's got a lot of talent as a lyricist. So I want to make use of that in the future. I hope we can keep going with this.
Oh man, it was fun. It was an experiment for me too.
But your time to reflect and be on your own, I'm sure that's where you came up with the lyrics. You had time to really dig into the soul of these tunes. So that's we sort of benefited from your isolation, I guess. You might
yeah.
You know, the thing that I find interesting from my perspective on things as a music lover and following jazz and just music is that a lot of people don't understand where these songs come from, the composer, the one that actually, you know, comes up with the ideas for the songs. For instance, a lot of people, Sinead O'Connor, Nothing Compares to You, no one has any idea that Prince, that was his song.
I see. Yeah.
You know, isn't that an interesting concept, is kind of the one that puts it out front and the one that composes? What's your perspective on that, on like how that works and how what people, the fan realizes about this very, I would almost see as an exhaustive process to construct a song and actually make it and put it out for people to hear?
Absolutely. Well, Gregg, you want to start?
I'm basically a tunesmith. One of my tunes with lyrics is actually on the album, which is very gratifying to me. But that was I've only written 3 tunes basically with lyrics. So I'm a tunesmith, and I've worked in isolation for a 20-year period, and then in a more coordinated manner for another 5-year period. That all the material came out during that time period, and then I intersect with Randy Napoleon, who was Freddie's guitarist for years, and upfront player, and jazz cruise world entertainer, basically. And that's just a good intersection of somebody that can bring the music to life in front of, and knows what the crowd looks like, feels like, and how they react to material. So again, before this effort, I knew Randy as a great arranger. His last 2 albums that's what stuck out. I mean, outside of his great playing, but the arranging was just out of this world. So that's been a good collaboration, because he's got all the aspects that I don't have, and I've got a whole ton of original material that he can sort of dive into. So
yeah, I would piggyback on that. I've never done a record like this. First off, it's the only record I've ever done where it's all new material. So, usually I've got a mix of originals and, songs composed by jazz musicians, or kind of, older standard songs. That was kind of a huge undertaking to hopefully make something that is palatable and immediately accessible without being familiar. And I also had never so closely collaborated with somebody on material as I did with Gregg leading up to this. It was fascinating having someone give me the trust, creative freedom to say, here's some brand new stuff. What does this suggest to you? And some of them I didn't manipulate a whole lot, and some of them I really built out, from with intros and outros and counterlines and interludes. And so, it really feels like Gregg's music, but it also feels like my music to me. And I'm certain I never would have come up with any of this without his influence. So it's really interesting. It's a one-of-a-kind kind of thing.
So what is the meaning behind the title Puppets?
I guess quite a while back, and I'm a tunesmith. It was just a tune that popped into my head. Basically, I built it out, and the rest, all the magic, is Randy. So go ahead, Randy.
It was this kind of poignant melody that Gregg wrote. I was searching for ways to integrate the voice into the song, and I just started thinking about puppets and the image of something being controlled from the outside without knowing it. And I suppose, like everyone else, I'm living through the kind of insane times that we're in, with autocracy and a lot of turmoil, and sometimes I feel like people are not thinking or aware of what is influencing them all the time. So I suppose that's what I was thinking of when I wrote the words for it. And then in terms of, arrangement, and I turned the intro into like a little kind of like a canon between the voice and the guitar. We actually did something which I've never done on any of my records before. We did some overdubbing. There's some overdubbing with bass clarinet and flute on this record, as well as we multi-tracked some voice. So it's, still kind of playing the way I always have. I'm trying to swing. I'm trying to play some bebop and some blues and play some nice melodies, but the presentation is very different.
Yeah, adding that bass clarinet was brilliant. That just adds so much to that, especially that tune. It just sells it completely. So, with that lower voice, wonderful.
And I think what's interesting is that when people to get together to create music, there's always this potential for magic. And I'm curious, with you two teaming up the way you have and your respective roles in this project, what was the magic? Why does this album work so well between the composing and the arranging and the performing and the final product that we have right now?
If you read any of my literature as far as on my website and interviews I've done in the past, I pay homage to the Great American Songbook, and I think that's where, as Rodney Whitaker says, the stuff is familiar. I can't really put my finger on it. It's familiar. Well, it's familiar because I've soaked up the Great American Songbook, and that's where Randy and I connect with all the classic performances he's done over the years with the Great American Songbook, which the whole thing resonates, and that's my influence. So
that's beautiful. Yeah, I guess I'm always searching for melodies, whether they're composed or improvised, or kind of the textural melodies, which I think of as counterlines or bass lines. I like writing that is all strongly melodic, whether it's Bach writing a fugue, every voice is its own melody, a bebop kind of line. But yeah, I think the thing that really made this work so well is the closeness and the trust that Gregg and I have for each other. I almost never did we have a different idea on anything. I'd say, Gregg, what do you think about this? He'd say, yeah, run with that. That's great. The only thing is I yodeled on one track on Truck Driver Blues, and Gregg said, we can't leave this on. And of course he was right. My singing is really terrible, but I thought it would be funny. But we're going to save that for next time. So that was probably the only place we disagreed in terms of interpretation. And I've arranged dozens of records for varying artists. Usually there's more instruction and less freedom. So to me, this was amazing. Gregg really said, just whatever you want to do with these. And I said, are you sure? He said, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we're in the later books. The first two books are I've written 4 books of material. The first 2 books are quite dense. And the last 2 books were begging for arranging, basically. And my current project is along the same lines with another local guitarist, Eldon Kelly. And I'm just giving him the freedom to make these into something, beyond. They can use B parts. They can use a lot of arranging because they're fairly sparse compared to the dense material that I wrote in the past. So this is all by intent that I turned Randy loose because these tunes needed to be expanded upon, basically, and I trusted him implicitly. So that worked out beautifully. And going back to yodeling, I think that we had a little fun with this, but the spirit was there. He had the spirit of a yodeler. He's just not a yodeler. So
I had the spirit, if not the intonation.
so we had fun with that. I had to put my producer's big pants on and say, no, man.
Yeah.
Not doing
Yeah, you don't hear about that a whole lot. My son, I have a son, Miles, and he's special needs. And years ago, we volunteered at an Alzheimer's unit at a local nursing home on Saturday mornings. And there was a dude there that was a professional yodeler, and they would be like, hey, you got to come here and hear this guy. And man, this dude was totally just kind of a tranquil older cat. But once they said, hey, go ahead and bust into it, it's like some ghost got into him, and he just boomed out. So yeah, it's definitely a lost art for sure. But you mentioned the freedom of taking your songbook and going with it, and that's really the backbone of jazz. I mean, anytime you hear musicians talk about the joy of creating this music, that's the key to it. It's the freedom.
That's
absolutely
right.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, ultimately, what do you want the listener to get from this album?
I want these tunes
Gregg,
to be.
You want to talk first? Yeah.
I want these tunes to be stuck in their head. So then, when they walk down the street, that tune's in their head, and they're not sure where it came from, or they wake up in the morning, that tune's in their head, and they have to think about where they heard that tune, and hopefully it's from live shows in the future. If we can make that happen, my goal is to get those tunes stuck in people's heads, I guess.
That's beautiful. I guess my goal with music is to give people something that they're going to enjoy, and I would say you want a certain amount of surprise and freshness, I think, because that makes something enjoyable. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. But for me anyway, the kind of music I like the best is grounded too. You can tap your foot to it. The groove feels great, and it's hummable. So I suppose those are always my goals, whether I'm, playing standards or, writing and composing. But yeah, I think I'm not sure how I would categorize this. It's a very quirky record. It's unlike anything I've done before, and I'm quite proud of how it came out. The sound is very good.
That's where we intersect. Is if you ask me, what's the nitty gritty of my composing ability, I guess, is humbly putting it, is melodic movement. That's really what makes the whole thing go. And if I can move it in a little different direction than you're expecting, then the musicians appreciate that, because they're used to playing certain patterns, and when you interrupt that pattern or reverse it a little bit or turn it upside down, that gives a nice little buzz there. Okay, that's really cool. So
that's right.
That's where Randy and I are on the same page, because he likes melodic movement as part of what makes him work too. So
beautiful. So let's get to the good business of getting information out on where folks can pick up the album, stream it, pick up any of Gregg's books. So respectively, if you want to let us know where they can get more information on each of you, the album, and anything you have going on, even live shows coming up.
Well, the street date is this Friday, actually, and Randy is coming to. We have a performance area in our house here in Lansing, East Lansing, and we're bringing in Tamir Hendelman, the famous pianist from the Jazz Cruise, and I have actually an album here with him backing up Barbra Streisand and her coming out of retirement. So he's a grade A, top-notch, A+ pianist, and Randy's in the same territory as a guitarist. So that's we're doing a show here Friday night, sort of a smaller show, because it looks like the virus is still kicking up a little bit. So it's going to be an intimate show, let's put it that way. This will be on Origin, OA2 Records, actually, which is part of Origin. They'll hit all the outlets, digital and stores this Friday, and then we'll start make an appearance on the charts, the Jazz 300. And my site is gregghilljazz.com. If you want some of the other material is available. All the books can be ordered there. And that's about it. Randy?
Yeah, I mean, as always, I'm kind of all over the place and doing a bunch of different stuff. Next month, I'm going out to Brevard, North Carolina, for some performances and teaching at Brevard Jazz Institute. I've got a gig with one of my mentors, the masterful John Clayton. We're doing a gig at Tri-C Jazz Festival. Nice. And then otherwise, just, kind of sticking home, I think, the next month, playing in Detroit and Lansing and hanging out with my kids and practicing. I'm just finished up the semester at Michigan State University, so I'm catching my breath a little bit here.
Cool. Gentlemen, thank you for opening up about the album. Good luck with everything as we move forward. It's great to catch up with you.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in Michigan, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to both Randy and Gregg for their time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. And for everything Joe Domino related, go to joedomino.com. And when you're there, you can contribute either through PayPal or Patreon to keep this thing going. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.